A career CP3 has built quite the resume, 2,472 playoff points, 11 All-Star selections, and 10 All-NBA selections. And now, ladies and gentlemen, he can finally add an NBA Finals appearance after the Suns closed out the Clips last night in Game 6. CP3 dominated, dropping 41 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds, and 3 steals in the 130-103 win. Not too shabby. We now welcome in Tim Legler for this debate. Freddie, I want to start with you here. After reaching the finals, is CP3 a top 5 point guard all time now?
Well, he was on my list of top 5 point guards of all time. I don't think there's any dispute with me. You can argue with me about it, but he's on that list. I mean, Magic Johnson's my favorite point guard of all time. I think he's the best point guard of all time. But Chris CP3 is on that list with a John Stockton, with a Magic Johnson, with an Oscar Robertson. He's top 5 to me. And even before last night happened, where he put that 41-point piece on them, especially 7 of 8 from the three-point line, the fact that he has been able to still do this in the 16th year and play at that kind of a high level and be that leader that you were hoping to get and you knew you were going to get, but you didn't know what kind of how that was going to manufacture itself. We've seen that when he was with Phoenix and with other teams as well. I did not need to be convinced that Chris Paul was a top 5 point guard of all time. Now, last night, of course, helps that, no doubt about that. But he's always been that pure point guard for me that can control the game, can really get on your last nerve the way he plays defense, does a little things here and there to get under everybody's skin. But last night didn't have to convince me he's a top 5 point guard of all time. I already had that in my mind no matter what happened in this series.
Look, I'm not ready to go there yet. And the reason I'm not ready to go there because he's not done playing. CP3 has at least 3 to 4 more good years left in him. When you mention the names of Magic Johnson and Oscar Robertson and Stockton, you know, you still got, in my opinion, you still can argue the Jason Kidds of the world, right? You still can argue the Steve Nashes of the world. I think Chris Paul has so much more basketball to play before we start saying top 5, top 4, top this. Let that play out. Because, yeah, the body of work that he's done in his 16 years has been there. There's a but in there because he hasn't cashed in that chip yet. And I think once that chip happens for him, it will be clear cut that he is probably a top 5 point guard. Magic Johnson was on our show the other day, and we simply asked Magic if Chris Paul was a top 5 guy, and he kind of, you know, didn't give an answer, kind of said, well, let's wait and see, much like me, because you have to finish the deal. I think, 16 years you would think, okay, yeah, that's finishing the deal. But because he has years left, I want to wait and see.
Yeah, look, here's where I'm at on this conversation. I think one thing sounds like we agree on is this. Magic Johnson is the guy for me. He's the best point guard of all time. This is a subjective conversation, obviously. There's no set criteria here. One of the things that makes it difficult to compare all these guys, the position has changed so dramatically over history. And what the responsibilities of that position are, it's really difficult to compare guys from different eras because the point guards of the modern era are more about guys that can go and get you 25 to 30 on any given night. That wasn't a primary responsibility for most of the point guards historically. When you start talking about a guy like Magic Johnson, you start talking about a John Stockton. I mean, Oscar Robertson put up those kind of numbers, but they didn't think that way back then. Even a guy like Jason Kidd, it was different during his era. It's not the case now. Chris Paul has more of an old school mentality about the position. He's absolutely worthy of being in the debate after Magic. All those other guys. And one guy, by the way, that you guys didn't mention, and I'm just listening to all the names, I think you covered most of them. One guy, I didn't hear his name, was Steph Curry. I think you got to put him also in this list and in this conversation. But again, look at the nature of the way Curry plays. It's totally different than the way Chris Paul, Magic Johnson, Jason Kidd, John Stockton played the position. Damian Lillard is one of the more explosive point guards of our game now. And who knows, after 6-8 years down the road, we might put Damian Lillard in that category. And again, plays the position completely differently. So it's a tough debate. It's a difficult conversation. But I do not have a problem with Chris Paul being in that group of guys when you start making your list 2 through 5.
I just want him to finish the deal, Legs. You're right. And you say we didn't mention Dame, Dollar, or Curry. The reason I wouldn't put Steph in there because he's in a box by himself at the style of play. Like you said, this era of basketball is a little bit different. I mean, if you said to me, Key, pure shooter all time, NBA, I would say Curry. And if you said point guard, I just wouldn't say that, even though he plays the position. It's almost like at the wide receiver position. Guys say he's a great wide receiver. This dude playing the slot, man. He's never caught a ball on the outside a day in his life, but he has 700 career catches all from the slot. So the first thing you say is he's a wide receiver. It's like, no, he's not a wide receiver. He may be listed as a wide receiver, but he is a slot receiver. And so that's kind of how I look at Steph Curry. I look at him in a different box all by itself.
It's funny. I thought about this, Key and Legs, when you mentioned in terms of comparing eras and how the point guard position has changed. And that's why you have these subjective conversations, because it's very hard to compare eras. For example, Drew Pearson waited that long to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. To me, he should have been in the Pro Football Hall of Fame 15 to 20 years ago. But people tried to compare his numbers to other numbers after him. And I think that's where the whole conversation is with Chris Paul and with Magic Johnson, Oscar Robertson. Another guy we forgot about is Isaiah Thomas. To me, Chris Paul is almost like a generation Isaiah Thomas in this day and age, being that old school point guard that can make big shots and was a tough guy and a tough defender. So, yeah, that's why it's hard to compare eras. But there's certain guys that I think can go past that. And that's why I had Chris Paul in my top 5. We look at LeBron James. He's not finished with his career yet, but it's automatically assumed that he's a top 3 player of all time in the NBA in terms of being the greatest of all time. I know it being subjective in terms of being selected with the point guard position and different positions, but you're right, Key. When you have wide receivers, you can try to compare numbers, but it depends on where a guy played or what era he played in. That's why it's hard to try to match Jerry Rice here and Sterling Sharp there and you there and somebody else. It's the same way with the point guard position in the NBA, because Oscar Robertson averaged a triple-double for a whole season. That wasn't done ever again until Russell Westbrook. And then that conversation came about, he's a stats compiler. And think, well, that's stupid. If you're a great player, you're compiling stats. That's exactly what you're doing. So Chris Paul's been able to compile these numbers, and that's why I put in my list of top 5. But I clearly understand from your point and Leg's point, when you're trying to compare guys in different eras and different styles, it becomes more of a subjective conversation than a truth conversation.
Well, that's why I would say,
Hey,
Legs,
one thing,
I want to know. Go ahead. Go ahead, Lex.
I just want to finish up one thing about this, because this is an important point. Freddie brought up LeBron James' name. Let's be honest here. Let's be honest. LeBron James is a point guard. He's going to go down. He's going to be recorded as a small forward. LeBron James has initiated offense probably 75, 80% of the possessions he's been on the floor in an NBA game. He initiates all offense on the teams he plays on. Like, he played with Kyrie Irving in Cleveland. You going to try to tell me that Kyrie Irving was the point guard on that team? No, LeBron James is the point guard on every team he's played on. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. When the responsibilities are that different, it's hard to label guys and what they are. That's why, for me, clearly Magic was a point guard, and I just think the winning, the playmaking, the ability to take over a game as a scorer if he had to, the way he dominated games as a rebounder, if that's what it took, and he's just mainly the ultimate winner. That's what I view Magic Johnson as, and that's why I would put him number 1. But if we're really talking about the breakdown of how guys play and stylistically and responsibilities, you'll never convince me that LeBron James is not a point guard, because that is the way he has played the position from day one.
But, Legs, that's a special category like Steph Curry. LeBron James goes into a special category. When you talk about pure point, I feel so bad I'm sitting here arguing with an ex-NBA player about the damn position. But, oh, well, when you think about it, pure point guards, Isaiah Thomas, you know what I'm saying, Magic Johnson, John Stockton, those are pure point guards. Everybody else that we're talking about, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Dame Lillard, they're in a special category, in my opinion. I can't put them in the point guard category because they do so much, so many different ways.
Well, you know why? Because the NBA is positionless basketball now, and that's why. That's why the lines get blurred. Because Lex and I had this conversation a couple of years ago about how positionless basketball has really blurred the lines in terms of who's effective doing what and how effective doing what. For example, Steph Curry 15, 20 years ago is a shooting guard. Or if he's going to play the point guard, he's not going to do what he does with the basketball. Lex and I talked about this, Key. That really started in the early 90s when Kevin Johnson started being a 20-10 guy. When he played with Phoenix, Mark Price was doing the same thing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. All of a sudden, they were asking their point guards to be, you can be our top scorer on our basketball team and our top assist player. That's when that line really started to shift with the NBA and the point guard position. Magic was doing it differently, but he had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and guys like that, and then he became more of a scoring point guard. So now we have positionless basketball in the NBA. It really blurs the lines more than ever when it comes to point guard, shooting guard, small forward, etc.
Hey, last point, if I can make this about Chris Paul, keep this in perspective. You think about this 10 years ago, there was a debate in the NBA who the best point guard was. It was a Chris Paul, Darren Williams conversation, and it was really split down the middle. There were a couple years in there you could have made the strong case that Darren Williams was the best point guard in the NBA. Think about this, though. Darren Williams retired 4 years ago. Chris Paul is playing maybe the most important and meaningful basketball of his career and the best basketball of his career to drop 41 in a Game 6 to get to his first finals. And he's not slowing down anytime soon. He's got a few more years in the tank. I think that is a very strong argument. Longevity of greatness at the position plays into it. And Chris Paul to be doing this at his age,
36.
and still going out there, being able to take over games as a bucket getter, as a floor leader, coming up with a key defensive play, being the IQs of the operation, getting the best out of young teammates like he has with Booker and Ayton. He's in that conversation. He's in the debate. He's absolutely worthy of it. It's subjective, but for me, it's not subjective at number one. I think that's where Freddie and I agree. I'm not sure about Key, but Magic is the number one guy for me.
Absolutely.
After that, have at it.
Absolutely number one guy.
Yeah, well, players around the league were giving him his flowers last night. We saw Steph Curry tweet out his greatness. We saw Ja Morant, a lot of others as well. But just looking at stats alone, Chris Paul is one of the 2 point guards of all time to be top 5 in assists and top 50 in points. John Stockton is the other. Legs, thank you so much. We always appreciate you. Good to see you.
Thanks very much.
All right, let's keep it moving. Tim Tebow and Reggie Bush are 2 of the greatest college football players of all time.